guitar, and vibrato or bending. All those kinds of things can happen in this style too. So everything that you know you can cram into this style, and it just gives it more texture and more density and makes it seem less and less like a caricature of music and more like real music. So you can, fingerings come into question immediately with the sliding. You might want to go. Now the effect you want is this, while this note's ringing. So you find a fingering that's an alternative fingering that allows you to keep this finger down while you move the other three. Things like vibrato, you just notice me do little shakes. So all the different things you know about you can do, including bending. If you know your double bends, you can use those in there. Anything you use, put them in there. So when you put it all together with the pull-offs over here, and the offbeats in your index finger, and sliding vibrato, anything else you know, you get something that's pretty rich. And so I'll play another couple of courses of this just to try to put it all together for you. We'll see what comes out. Okay, I think I'll change directions here for a minute and say you want to do something besides blues and G, swing. And what I would suggest is work out other styles of music, obviously. And what really got me started doing this was not the traditional jazz stuff in the first place. It was all the years that I spent playing in soul bands and funk bands where we didn't have enough people to go around to cover all the parts, and so I started doing more than one part at once. And I kind of got into the back door of this walking bass thing. Although I'd heard it done a lot, I'd admired Joe Pass for many years, and the great Tommy Crook, whom I grew up listening to in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was a master of this style. But in fact, it was really in top 40 bands that I learned to do this stuff in the first place. And I'll give you an example of a couple of the kinds of things that I had to deal with back then, and what came of it. Usually it would be funk grooves, really. And I remember a particular one from Betty Wright's Cleanup Woman. And it had 4 really funky guitar parts plus a bass part. And there were only about 3 of us in the band, and one of them was a drummer. He couldn't do any of the parts. And so we ended up trading off and doing all these different parts together. And I remember it was an enormous technical challenge for me, but I learned so much by doing this. It was a combination of just 2 parts, and I'll demonstrate them to you. That's part number 1. Notice I'm doing the backbeat in there as we go just to keep time. The other is the bass part. Okay, so we didn't have enough guys to go around to cover all the parts, and there was still another couple that the great player Terry Saunders used to do. We would switch off and do them, but anyway, the part that I worked out was this. So that's just an example, and we'll include that one in the book so you can figure out how I fingered it. But I guess what I'm getting at is, again, start with real music, whatever that is to you, and figure out how you can take parts out of that and combine them. I used to do little parts like... you can have a lot of fun with those things. So now that I'm doing what I'm doing with Patty, of course I have to do the whole band thing, and so it gets a little bit more organized than that. I have to do another part or two on top of it. So with these, unlike the swing thing, once you get it, or in the case of the swing, once you get it, you can just kind of improvise and make it up as you go along. These have a lot more rigid basic parts that you need to work out as independence exercises, and the individual parts are usually a little bit more syncopated, so it can get a little bit confusing. It took me years to realize that I might have saved a lot of time by writing some of those parts out rather than just by trying to keep it all juggling in my head. And so you might find that that's easier to do. I don't usually do that. But I'll demonstrate a couple of them, and I think in both cases I'm going to tune down to a D here. Use that about a third of the time probably. Okay, so from one of the songs that Patty and I do, Everything's Gonna Be All Right, this is a good illustration of this, this whole concept. It takes advantage of all the different techniques that I use to create this. The first is, you're talking about a 16th note feeling in the bass, and my approach to getting that is using my thumb and doing a double stroke. Just exactly the same kind of technique you would use if you were holding a pick, only you're just doing it with the side of your thumbnail. And I'd like to spend just a minute focusing on this because I've found that for many guitarists, this is a rather perplexing technique to get down. And I know for me, it came very slowly. I've seen people get it very quickly. My particular solution to the problem is, in this hand, to actually close my hand up. Instead of playing with a standard classical technique, I close this joint into the hand as far as I can. So you get this. You can see instead of being open like this, it's closed over, and then I open the thumb back up again. So you end up with this instead of that. And the effect of that is that you get a very rigid thumb, which is capable of doing a really strong upstroke. It kind of catches underneath the string. Later I learned to do it just with a standard classical technique, but initially if you lower your thumb into your hand like this, you'll find it'll work really well. Then the downstroke is the traditional stroke, like a rest stroke. The upstroke actually comes out of the guitar and snaps the string a little bit. It's not just an upstroke, it's an outstroke. So you have down as a kind of in-stroke and up as the reversal, which is a kind of outstroke. Okay, well there you've got 16th notes, so you can play any rhythm you want to in the bass. Okay, now with a pick that's pretty easy, and with your thumb, as soon as you get the technique, it's just as easy as it is with a pick. The only problem is you can see my hand is waving back and forth, and it's a different issue if you want to play anything on the top at the same time. So what I found was you can, if you use a slightly different technique in the thumb part, then you can get the fingers to do what they want to do, which is play some chords. And I do this either with a kind of open-handed strum or traditional classical plucking. Here's the open-handed strum. Something like that. I'm using just the tips of 2 fingers, could be the tips of 3 fingers, whatever you like. It could even be your pinky. I do it with my pinky sometimes. Or traditional classical technique. Or a combination of those two. Or you could do something that I find I haven't seen a lot of players do, but it seems to work really well, which is it's the classical technique you use for playing lines, only you use it for playing chords.